The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
A very warm welcome, everyone. It's actually quite nice and warm here where I am. Hope it's nice and warm where you are too. So I hope you're all well and safe. And first of all, just like to thank you for making time to join us today. My name is Meghna, and I lead on the digital innovation and healthcare sector here at the UKIBC. Before we start, I will just take you through some housekeeping points. So if I can request you all to stay on mute to avoid any disturbances during the session. You can send us any questions you have anytime through the question feature on your screen. I will take these questions and put them to the panelists at the end of the session. And also, just so you know, this session will be recorded and shared with you after the session is over, so you don't need to take any notes if you don't want to. Now, moving to the subject, I think the last few months particularly have further highlighted the importance of having a very robust tech sector, our reliance on data, and I think most importantly, the importance of collaborative working, whether it's business to business or business to government, when it comes to effective decision making and policy making, which also makes one think about issues like data security, data privacy, particularly I think, when governments around the world are using emergency laws for accessing and sharing data. So in today's session, we will be talking to some of the businesses here on issues like essentials that encourage more government and business collaboration, things like data legislation, digital infrastructure, but also hear about some of the initiatives run by their organizations, which is supporting the work being done globally on COVID-19 and some of the challenges they're facing. So without any further delay, can I introduce you to our speakers? The panel session will be moderated by Nikhil Narendran. He's the partner at Trilegal. He will be joined by Alistair Tebbit, who is the head of government affairs at RELX, and Jim Bligh, the director for corporate affairs at TCS. So over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you, Meghna. You've really set the stage for me. Thanks for that. So like Meghna mentioned some time back, our focus will largely be on data innovation and how do we use data as a tool while handling a pandemic of this nature. What is our experience so far? What we have seen so far in Europe, in UK, in India, and the rest of the world, and what are the learnings that we have from these collective experience that we have had so far. And so if you look at, there are various protocols and various existing projects that the governments have come up with. There are several projects that the private parties have announced with respect to contact tracing or proximity testing, or when it's to do with using big data to predict health analysis or figure out if they can create patterns on predictive analysis or business intelligence around how the pandemic can be stopped. So this also involves a large amount of cooperation amongst governments. Governments needs to speak to each other, share data. Similarly, there needs to be cooperation between corporations and governments and corporations and corporations. And how does this work given the current scenario where we have existing rules and regulations dealing with data transfer and processing of data? So I think, as you know, the GDPR exists in Europe as a very robust framework and governs data collection and processing. If you look at India, we don't have a similar law, an equivalent law, though we are in talks to, or we are in stages where it's discussed before the Parliament to have a data protection law per se. It's because of this whole COVID pandemic itself, it's been pushed, and we can only expect that to happen sometime maybe later this year or early next year if things go well. So I'd like to straight dive deep into the panelists, Alistair and Jim, and give them each an opportunity to talk about how they've seen the whole situation and how their organizations have been working with governments or by themselves creating innovative solutions to tackle the COVID menace, and what's their outlook towards the rest of the year. So, Alistair, if I can start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil, and thank you, UKIBC, for the opportunity to talk on this really important topic. I mean, for context, for those listening here who are not familiar with RELX's business is about providing data, content, and technology to a range of sectors globally, and that includes the health services of countries around the world, the scientific research sector globally. So as you can imagine, we've had a very busy time in the last few months. We have many initiatives in play to support governments, and I won't go through all of these, but I'll pick out two so you just have a flavour. I mean, I think very early on, back in January, we realised that COVID-19 had the potential to be very impactful. So we decided, as the world's leading provider of scientific data, that we'd provide free access to all the services and data that we hold that might be relevant to addressing the pandemic. And so we launched in late January. So if you think where we were on COVID-19 back in late January, it's very early days. We launched a coronavirus information center. That center, which is basically a web portal, contains a wide range of COVID-19 related information, data, COVID-19 care plans, guidelines for clinicians and the public, as well as over 25,000 research articles focused on COVID-19. That portal is regularly updated as more data information is produced and peer reviewed, and the use of that portal has been phenomenal. I mean, it's had nearly 1 million unique visitors last time I checked. Over 50 million pieces of data and articles have been downloaded from the site so far. So that's been a global initiative. But in a country like India, that's obviously playing a really leading role in researching for a vaccine through its elite research institutions, we've also been able to support those institutions by giving free access to all our content and data in the research space, and not just COVID-19 related information. So digital information and data is obviously central. So that's something where we've been very happy to support governments around the world, including India. In the UK, we're currently involved in supporting the National Health Service in judging how public sentiment and debate is evolving as it pushes out its contact tracing app in one part of the country. The government and National Health Service is using our big data media intelligence analytics to spot trends across 50,000 media sources relevant to the UK. Obviously, we've been happy to provide them with this service for free for the duration of the effort. We're currently in week 2 since the government launched the trial of the app. So what that sentiment looks like may provide a clue to the government as to whether a voluntary approach for getting people to download the app at sufficient scale can really work. So these are both ways that we've been using tech, digital approaches, and big data processing to lend support to governments around the world.
Thanks, Alistair. So I think, Alistair, from now we can move on to Jim. Jim, do you want to give your few intro remarks on how TCS has been working alongside to fight this pandemic?
Thank you very much indeed, Nikhil and Alistair, and UKIBC and Trilegal as well. One of the fascinating things about this pandemic is how the response requires a concerted effort from all of society, and that includes business as much as it includes citizens. And I don't think we've seen in recent times the importance of these collaborations in the way that we're now going to see in future. For us, the very first priority is, of course, the safety and well-being of our employees, a healthy mind and a healthy body and all of that. We have 446,000 colleagues in 46 countries around the world, working with more than 1,000 customers, and inevitably the priority for us is to continue to support that mission critical IT that is the backbone of the economy and will be the foundation on which the economy will recover. We also want to make sure that our workers are physically and emotionally prepared for the long haul that we are in, and that they're capable and engaged and motivated whilst they work remotely. TCS has a target that by 2025, all employees in the business will spend around 25% of their time in a TCS office. So that means remote working is going to be huge for us, even more than it already is, but it's also going to be huge for other companies as well. Talent is the new foundation of business continuity, and the data around people and how people are using our systems, our secure, independent, location-independent workplace solutions, how people are using those, how they're serving their customers, and how and where they're doing that will be central to how we evolve over the coming months and years. Many of our greatest innovations have always come in, the darkest times. If you think of tin food and duct tape and microwaves, the ballpoint pen, radar, code breaking computers, all of these things have come in times of peril and often in times of war. For us, we think that there will be huge innovations, and the value of innovation will significantly increase in the coming years. We think that you need to react quickly using data, to test as you go, learn quickly, again, using the data that comes from the lessons that you learn to develop new solutions that will solve societal problems. We at TCS are working with the Indian government, with the Indian health authorities, and also governments around the world on the molecular compounds. We've identified 31 molecular compounds which could have a role in treating and potentially curing COVID. We're working with those bodies, providing data, open access databases and so on between government, academia, health authorities and businesses. And we're using artificial intelligence to make that happen. This free sharing of data for research, we shared hundreds of viral genome sequences, for instance, is really important to the future of tackling this disease. Also, tracking and monitoring. A lot of what we do anyway, core business, is Internet of Things work. It's sensors in engines to make sure that they're running properly and so on. We think that will increase, but we also think that tracking and monitoring products for health, for fitness, for pandemic tracking, for the rapid response in different local areas, for making sure that the workforce is healthy and happy and so on as well. All of this stuff is going to really pick up, and data again will be critically important there. We're seeing an accelerated shift to digital, of course. One of the big areas where digital has been forced upon a sector where it wasn't necessarily fully digitized before is education. So, of course, schools, universities, colleges and so on are now teaching and lecturing online in a way that they weren't before. TCS has risen to that. We have a global education and assessments platform called TCS ION, which we've offered free of charge to any educational institution in the world for the next 18 months. And so far, around 10 million students are availing themselves of the learning opportunities that come through that. Finally, Tata as a group has committed $200 million to helping to empower communities to tackle COVID. A lot of that is, of course, in India, but a lot of that is also around the world where we operate. This comes back to our founder, Jamsetji Tata, who effectively said that there's not really any point in doing business unless you serve the communities in which and from which you operate. And that's very much where the Tata Group is today. So we intend to continue to use data, to continue to use our innovations to drive business success for us and our customers. And we also intend to do so in a way that boosts trust and reputation in the sector. We can talk a little bit about trust and reputation later, but I think that's going to be an increasingly important part of the picture as we go forward, as more people work remotely, but also as more people spend almost all of their time on the internet. I think that's going to come up as a big issue in future. So that's my opener. Back over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you, Jim. I think the last 10 minutes, you both have managed to cheer me up so well. I'm not sure about the rest of the audience, but I feel very hopeful, even while facing a pandemic, because we've got an assurance that the best of the brains in the industry, along with the government, is sort of working towards putting us back on track. So I think what we learned from you, Jim and Alistair, is the fact that, look, we have committed large number of resources. We are coming up with innovative solutions. We are coming up with new ways to educate. We are coming up with new ways to research and ensure that information is shared in a seamless manner. And we are also doing that at a scale that we have not seen before. And despite the fact that we are being hit by a pandemic, our resources are working in an effective manner, and which means that, look, because of all the tech working, because everyone is working together, we may probably find, I think most of you will know that if we manage to find a cure for a vaccine for coronavirus, even within a year to 2 years time frame, that will be the fastest vaccine ever developed. So you give a lot of things to hope for. But that also brings me to this question, because we are seeing a lot of innovation in various sectors. So for instance, education, right? So we are using various edtech platforms so that our kids are engaged. We are also finding new ways to do business. We are sort of focusing on ensuring that our employees are productive and working from home and contributing to the economy. So there are new ways. The new normal is being sort of formed in this day and age. And what are the governments sort of doing to help? So, so in the sense that, look, whenever there is a new way of doing business, there is bound to be some amount of friction from a law or a regulation, because large amount of labor laws, large amount of laws which govern the working of workplaces per se have been drafted in the last century, and sometimes even inspired from the century before that. So we are sort of carrying those hangover of those laws even to this 21st century, and how are the governments responding to it? How flexible are they? So I can probably speak from my experience in India, but first I'd like to hear from you, Alistair and Jim. Starting with you, Alistair.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil. I mean, I think in terms of what we're looking for from governments at this precise moment, I think we need to be respectful and patient, and share with governments where the pain points are and what will need to be done to reopen, industries and sectors such as tech, insofar as tech has been closed in certain areas. We have to recognise that government is hugely distracted. We're basically in a holding pattern. So in the short term, as a business, our priority during the pandemic, probably like most businesses, and as Jim I think has indicated, but this certainly applies to TCS, remains the health and safety of our colleagues, and thinking through how we can support the wider communities in which we operate, whilst continuing to operate our business and provide services to our customers. So I think we need to be careful in terms of what we say to government this time, because I think, as they say, they're hugely distracted. However, I think as governments begin to develop a bit more bandwidth and have more time to think about things, I think what we really want them to do is to come to the tech industry and ask us, what are the lessons? What do we need to do to be better prepared for the next pandemic? How can we use digital and tech to make sure we have more robust ways of working across our economies? So that should this happen again, and I fear it probably will do in some shape or form, our economies have more flexibility and more depth, so that an event like this can be less disruptive, and we can make sure that more of the economy can continue to operate with a higher degree of effectiveness in these kind of conditions. What we definitely shouldn't be doing, once we get through this terrible crisis and revert to normal, and in the excitement, I suppose, of getting back to a normal, and let's hope we do get back to a normal, is that we forget to ask the questions and neglect to implement the learnings. And personally, I think there is a significant risk that that's exactly what will happen. We may be so consumed getting our economies moving again that we miss the lessons and don't invest in better systems and better infrastructures. That would be a terrible outcome. There's a whole range of issues that one could talk about, and I suspect we'll get into some of them as we go through the range of the meeting. But I just thought some sort of high-level thoughts on your question, Nikhil, would be helpful.
Sure. So Jim, do you have your thoughts to weigh in on this?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with Alistair. I think that's completely right. I think particularly on that point that government are, honestly, they're pretty overwhelmed at the moment. And I think businesses have found when they've gone into government and said, we have this offer for you, we'd like to help you out with X, Y, Z. Government have, kind of shrugged their shoulders and go, well, everyone's saying that, thanks. What can you bring us that we've never had before? I think what we can bring that the government has never had before is the real insight into how citizens and businesses are changing their behaviours as a result of the lockdown and as a result of living with the pandemic. We can see, for instance, how consumer behaviour is changing in retail. We can see how people are shifting their transport patterns or their ability to look after their family in different ways. They're changing the way they do that. They're changing the way they contact people and communicate with people. A lot of those changes are, they were happening anyway. This has just been a huge catalyst to make those things happen more quickly. So part of it for us is actually being able to say to the government, look, we can see where the future lies. We can see what's going to happen next based on the behaviours that we can see and we can track through the software and the data that we and our customers have. Government can come to us and find out what that looks like if they want to, when they're in slower time thinking about the challenges that come ahead. I think, Nikhil, you made a really interesting point that issues like labour law are probably decades behind in some ways where the labour market actually realistically is. And I think when the dust settles on this particular lockdown and this particular period that we're in, the questions will be asked about actually where do responsibilities start and stop for employers and individuals? Where do people go if they have, if they're on 0 hours contracts or they're self-employed or whatever, if they have particular issues over, say, the health and safety in their workplace? There are loads of issues that we haven't really thought about in great depth before, where there were challenges before, but actually those challenges haven't been addressed, that we'll need to get on with doing pretty quickly when the dust settles here. So I'd say that there's a period of change coming and we're in that now, but it's going to continue to accelerate, and government would do really well to come to the tech sector and say, what can you offer? How can you help us? And what data and insights do you have?
Right. So I think this has been a very similar experience of ours as well from the government. So in fact, the government, most governments, in fact, during this time has been, they've been very responsive. They've been look, it's one thing to I completely agree with Alistair when I said that, look, you should be careful about what you should be asking the government for, because the priorities have changed completely. They've got a different focus altogether. It's similar to a war. It's sort of defending one line and attacking or preparing to attack the virus at the same time. That's been happening right now. So their focus is different, but still, even at this point, they've been very receptive. We've seen many demands from the industry being accepted by the government. They're also taking into consideration the new realities. There are some discussions around labor laws, some discussions around various other laws which do not clearly belong in either this century or even for that matter during this pandemic times. The government is taking a very kind view towards it and giving relaxation so that we can get back onto track without much delay. And I think that's pretty much what we have seen across the globe as well, which is quite reassuring. The other thing, while one significant thing the government is also mindful of is not just about how the economy is stalled, but it's also about how the government business got stalled in the process, right? So I think one example that I just mentioned earlier was of the personal data protection bill itself, right? And Alistair, do you have any thoughts on the PDP bill and any specific comments on the bill, or what your expectation is from a PDP bill perspective?
Yes, sorry, sure. So I'm just coming off mute. Apologies. Sorry, there. Well, yeah, thank you, Nick. I mean, I think that the PDP bill is a really important issue. I mean, I'll be frank, I think there is a compelling case for the bill to be reassessed in light of the crisis. Yeah, it's a simple statement of fact that the bill was developed in the pre-COVID era. And yet since COVID, we've seen how using data and using analysis of that data has proved, I think pretty central to understanding the crisis, the nature of it, and sort of developing measures to address it. So when we identify the lessons about what we need to be able to do better next time, I mean, I would frankly be, again, hugely surprised if much better data management across government and private sector is not one of those biggest lessons. I'd also be surprised if one of the lessons isn't that international coordination and cooperation and data sharing across borders is is and will be in the future hugely important, and on this occasion probably could and should have been better, a lot better than it was. So I think it naturally follows that one of the questions that should be considered by governments, and I include India in this, is whether their data protection laws are as effective as they could be in a time when you're trying to manage a pandemic or indeed prevent one in the first place. Now in India, this question of what a country's data laws should look like, I suppose, is even more important to us because we don't actually know how the PDP bill would have performed during the crisis since it hasn't been implemented yet. So basically something is being proposed that hasn't been tried and tested in the circumstances that we find ourselves in India. So I would urge the government to do a full review of the bill. Yeah, take more evidence, take more comments from stakeholders, and avoid a hasty implementation. I mean, I suppose to be clear, I'm not saying that the bill in its current form will definitely be problematic for preventing or handling pandemics. I'm simply saying, yeah, that we should look again, yeah, because there are some potential issues. And let's give an example. I mean, the restrictions on international data transfers, particularly in relation to particular data categories, could prevent the sharing of that data, which could be important in coordinating the international response. And I think we have to remember this is not just about how states cooperate across borders by sharing data. And I think you made this point, Nikhil, earlier. The cooperation between private sector and public sector is going to be critical here as well. This is about private sector sharing data with governments and vice versa. The private sector is a key player as a source of data. I mean, just think about travel data in the context of COVID-19. It just seems to us that we should just consider where cross-border flows of private sector data could be relevant to managing pandemics and just make sure that we're not putting barriers in the way unnecessarily. So basically, I would respectfully suggest to the government that it reviews in detail that the bill will work before proceeding, and it considers any necessary changes that emerge from the review and looks to the importance of international cooperation and the sharing of data that is required to enable that kind of cooperation.
Right. So in fact, so I think one important thing that you just mentioned, other than just re-looking at the bill itself, so it also gives us a potential opportunity to sort of, I wouldn't use the word start from scratch because, I've been waiting for this bill since my time in law school. So I wouldn't use that word that we need to start from scratch, but I think there are some fundamental principles that we need to probably relook or have a rethink about. Because I think there's going to be a lot of change in the way the new normal is going to function. I mean, there are predictions that people will get less private when it comes to matters such as disease and health information due to the ongoing pandemic, or because of a collective experience of how we sort of fought this pandemic, because we haven't fought one in 100 years. So people or behavior will change. There will be impact on the shared economy or any sort of shared room or shared space concept, which means, like Jim said, your consumption pattern, your spending will change. We'll have to find new ways to entertain ourselves. So which means that some of the priorities will change. The new normal will also decide how the new data protection law should look like, and that probably gives India an opportunity. So I'm just interested to find out what's the experience that you have seen so far, Jim, in terms of how the GDPR is faring in terms of dealing with the whole information sharing that's happening across governments or governments and private parties. When you talk about the NHS X project, or when you look at projects such as GPT-3 or any other projects which are being discussed in Europe for proximity tracing or contact tracing, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think GDPR has been, it's obviously had huge impact on businesses around the place, and it's taken a while for businesses to adapt to it, but it covers multiple jurisdictions. It is a high standard, it's clear and easy to understand, and so on, and that's quite helpful. I think it would be, you know, at a time when the cumulative regulatory burden on businesses is quite large and the overall burden on businesses is quite large, changing data protection rules now, just when we're all used to it, probably wouldn't be a really sensible idea in the European, you know, or UK GDPR context anyway, and I'm sure that'll come up as an issue around Brexit in the coming month. I think, you know, just as kind of a broad point on this, the virus doesn't respect borders. A solution to the virus shouldn't respect borders either. It should almost be irrelevant to it. We view location as being kind of an abstract concept that actually doesn't really have a huge amount of relevance to solving a problem. You know, when the agile methodology was kind of devised nearly 20 years ago, the idea was that the agile teams would all have to be in the same room at the same time. That isn't really possible or desirable anymore, and so, you know, we've been using to great success for many years location independent agile. So it doesn't matter where you are, as long as we can get that expertise into the room where and when it's needed, that's what really matters. And I'd say the same in principle should be the case for data as well. As long as we get the right data in the right place to help inform decision making, that will be really helpful. So I think the message from me here is let's not kind of rush to change, but let's be realistic about how the use of data is evolving, how much more significant it is, and the importance as decisions are being made, but also how you know, borderlessness around the world is having an impact on the way people think and the way people expect to interact with data, their data to be handled and processed as well.
Right. Thanks for that, Jim. So I think so. It brings me back to again my point on the post-COVID world per se. So so I've got two parts to this question. So one is, and I'll probably expect you know, if both of you can sort of take a stab at it, it'll be good. So basically, the first point is on what do you think of a post-COVID scenario, and what will be the relationship between the tech industry and the government in the post-COVID scenario? And second, of course, is what is your prediction about how we as human beings or civilization will change the way we live, and what's the impact that will have on the business? So starting with you, Alistair.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil. So, I mean, I think our view would be India has been a leader in looking at how you can get more digitization into certain sectors and areas of work. And I would flag the work of Niti Aayog in particular in this area. But progress has been slow in some areas, and you could argue that the states could play more of a role. So in terms of relations between the Indian government and the tech sector, maybe my view is, and has always been, that India should look to double down on technology and its agenda around digital for sure. But it may need to develop more coordination and buy-in across the different layers of the state to make the transformation happen. States, for example, want to do a lot more on things like digital health and remote learning and education, and these are obviously areas that have become more pertinent in the context of COVID-19. But they don't necessarily have the resources. So I think there's something that needs to be done there. In terms of, you know, the second part of your question, you know, what do we see for, you know, the vision of the post-COVID world, if you like? I mean, I think we should be optimistic. The privacy issues that we've just been discussing, I think, are manageable with properly designed laws. And instead, you know, and I suppose I reiterate the point that I made earlier, you know, when government has time to think about this, we should look to the opportunities and work with government to make them happen. So, for example, as I say, the drive in India towards more telemedicine and things like more remote delivery of education are things that have been building anyway. And great work has been done in these areas already. But now the crisis is confirmed, one would hope to a wider pool of people that such approaches are really essential and should be accelerated. I mean, countries just can't afford not to develop capabilities in these areas. I mean, if you think, again, if you think about it through examples, patients with significant non-COVID-19 conditions haven't just disappeared during the crisis. They still need treating, and yet their access to care has probably been lessened unintentionally as clinical resources have been diverted into addressing COVID-19 issues. So we might have stored some problems up there as a result. So the ability of those non-COVID-19 patients to be able to access world-class, widely deployed telemedicine services would have alleviated that risk to some extent. And then on education, I think if, Jim's touched on this, and I wholly agree. I mean, I think if creating better systems to deliver education remotely using digital across all levels of the system emerges out of this crisis, so that we can keep things moving forwards for learners of all ages in such a crisis, that would also bring benefits for the disenfranchised, the rural poor, to better access the education system and improve their life's chances. So I think there are lots of wins to be had for society post-COVID. But as I said earlier, we need to learn the lessons and think about how we can implement the measures that are required to make these things happen. And in our excitement, hopefully, when normalization returns, we don't lose sight of the things that we still need to do.
Thanks, Alistair.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an enormous question, and I'll kind of challenge the premise a little bit. I don't think we will have a post-COVID world. I think we'll have a world with COVID. And it's how we adapt to a world where we are living with a very contagious and very dangerous disease with a high death toll. How do we respond to that? And I think a lot of the response that we put in place right now will shape the next decade of working and living and socializing and doing all the things that make us happy and skilled and earn money and so on. It also means that the changes that were happening before, I've already said, have been catalyzed and accelerated. But I also think the problems that we were raising before as a group of businesses have also been catalyzed and accelerated. A lot of those problems were about the march towards digitalization and digitization. So improving digital skills is absolutely critical, has never been more important. I've said that talent will be the new foundation of business continuity at the beginning, and I think that is a really important way of thinking about this, and actually how you treat your people who are working remotely, how you attract and support the people who are the best talent with the best skills, and where they are in the world and where they are able to kind of serve our customers and so on. All of that is really important, and I think we're going to have to spend a lot more time thinking about what the workplace looks and feels like to people who are highly skilled, highly talented, in demand, and not working in any physical office. So I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Digital skills is going to be critical to that. I think the other point is, we're all slightly disconnected from each other, and so we need to communicate with each other quite a lot more. That means employers communicating a lot more with employees. It means on a practical level, all of us individually communicating more with each other than we have done before. Finding connect with people that we would normally make in an office or networking at an event such as this, and trying to continue that, so we're all actually aware of what we're doing, what the challenges are, and so on, but that we're actually keeping in touch with each other. This is going to be really important to tackling the trust deficit in technology and the trust deficit in businesses. And I think the world with COVID is a world where trust becomes essential if we're going to have faith in each other's ability to get through this crisis and to be able to look after each other as institutions and as society and as sectors in that society as well. A report came out yesterday from .Everyone, which is a responsible technology think tank and a really, really good outfit. Their report is on trust in tech. 2/3 of Brits say that tech is regulated too little. A quarter have reported a problem online, but nothing happened. 20% of people believe that tech companies are designing products just with their own interests in mind. And more than half of people think that being on the internet, part and parcel of being on the internet, is that people will be out to try and cheat them. Now, that's really concerning as a tech business, but it's also really concerning as a user of technology and as somebody who works in a business which is entirely enabled by technology. it's really important that businesses try and address this. They think about their role, they think about their communication strategy, they think about how employees are going to be worked with, rewarded, make sure that you keep them physically and mentally well. But critically, how we improve this trust issue. Because if we don't, then how will people have confidence that we're doing the right thing for them and with them as we get, you know, years into this ongoing issue?
That's a very interesting point, James. In fact, it also sort of touches upon what we discussed earlier about the labor laws, right? So if you look at it, the government typically has approached regulation of businesses. You know, one of the essential touch points for government to regulate business is in fact through the physical presence or offices, or you know, incorporation of companies in various jurisdictions, so to speak, etc. But I think what we are now looking at is a scenario where anyone could be sitting at home anywhere in the world. In fact, a TCS employee could be sitting in anywhere in the world in some remote location and serving his projects to his clients in the USA and elsewhere. So though it would have happened essentially or channeled through a physical space per se, which gave the government a lot of ability to control and in fact a lot of ability to regulate. Now they also need to think through different channels in which through which they can regulate. So or in fact what you just mentioned about the trust deficit problem per se, which I think is largely an online problem rather than a tech problem in my opinion, because it's or so to speak, it's largely a web 2.0 problem rather than you know, the broader tech industry problem per se, but which means that the government will also find new ways to regulate. So which also means, you know, the question of cross-border, as we just mentioned, and both in the context, Alistair mentioned in the context of the lack of borders in terms of need for data exchanges, and you mentioned in terms of the fact that, look, there is no real border for the virus, so it can attack anyone. So it's going to require a kind of a large shift in the mindset of the government itself from the way they approach regulations. So I think there are no real solutions like that we can think of right now. But I'd like to. What do you think the government? What do you think will be in the minds of the government once we get over with this crisis? Because if TCS is looking to ensure that 25% employees are only 25% employees will be working from physical offices, it sort of changes the whole ways in which the government used to regulate the industries before, right? And also on the other hand, there is also a question of economy, which of course comes in because we are looking at more digitization, which means that many of the conventional businesses will find it troublesome. For instance, if companies adopt more work from home, of course, the direct hit would be on the real estate companies who build a large amount of you know, buildings for their own for their businesses. So what do you think the government's view on this will be? Starting with Alistair, and then we'll take Jim's opinion as well.
Thanks, Nikhil. I mean, you know, I think the focus coming out of the crisis will be on the economy, won't it? You know, almost in every country. So it's inevitable that that's where focus will fall. I don't think that is unhelpful to thinking through some of the problems that we face here in terms of then making sure that you've got robustness built within your systems, within your public services, and across the industries and sectors that we need to have running in the event of another pandemic. Because I mean, I agree with Jim. You know, this crisis is what may mitigate down, but it may not completely go away. And even if it does go away, I think we now know that we need to be ready for something like this again. So, I mean, in my view, the focus in government could and should be around, you know, driving the innovation that we've talked about here. I think we just need to be bold. You know, there are issues around trust. There are trust issues that are specific to the tech sector, but there are trust issues generally that relate to the business sector in general. There are trust issues in governments, and we're seeing some of those played out around public concerns in relation to things like contact tracing apps. But I think what we've learned over the last sort of 2-3 months is just the ability for people to be flexible, to switch to technology almost instantaneously. I look at what's happened within our own company. On one day, basically, the whole business moved over to remote working. Suddenly, 30,000 people were working remotely around the world. It happened so smoothly. Now that would not have happened 4 or 5 years ago. I think back to the technology that we were using 4 or 5 years ago to do video calls, and it was so much clunkier. I mean, thank goodness, insofar as there's anything good that's happened out of this, the timing, has allowed us to just be able to respond and work more flexibly across some industries, although sadly not in certain industries, of course. So, I mean, I think I'm an optimist on this. I think, there are huge opportunities. We have to be bold, and what we've seen happen over the last few months just strengthens my feeling on that. And yes, there are trust issues here that need to be answered and managed, and we need to be sensitive around privacy type issues. But there's a lot of opportunity here, and we shouldn't lose sight of it. And by opportunity, I mean opportunity for society to deliver services better, to help people access services better, to help people improve their educational prospects. And to my mind, those are the key things that government should be taking from this crisis.
So just a thought on the governance of remote working. We use a secure borderless workspace technology that I'm not convinced we certainly couldn't do these 5 years ago. But even if this has happened a year ago, I think it would have been a bigger challenge for the organisation than it is to have 95% of colleagues working from home. There's a lot of mutual trust between employees and the employer in governing that. But there's also kind of, there are question marks over how long this, if this goes on for a decade, just how are we governing what work is happening, the quality of it, and so on. That's all going to be, I think, up for discussion. I think on the government side, so government inevitably is going to focus on the economy, as Alistair said. They're going to be focused on growth and jobs, and making sure that those people who are currently furloughed or those people who have unfortunately lost their jobs can actually have a job to go back to in a few months' time will be a really important priority. Part of the challenge is going to be maintaining investment from overseas. Tata is the UK's biggest foreign investor as a group. TCS is one of the largest parts of that. Our investment is not in doubt and not an issue. But the government will be concerned, I think, that the UK is a less attractive place to invest relative to other countries who may have handled the crisis differently, or that actually just overall investment flows around the world generally dry up a little bit. That will be a big concern for government, given how important that will be to the recovery. I think for me, the critical issue is about skills. What will make the UK a world leader in the technology-driven future is making sure that people have the right basic skills, which is an issue, but actually crucially, we have enough people with the right advanced level STEM skills. We have said for years that there are shortages of STEM skills. There's an annual shortfall of 40 to 60,000 STEM qualified people in the UK. That has just become much, much, much bigger as an issue. We need to make sure people are equipped. Now is the time to make sure that people who are equipped with skills, that they're retraining if they don't have those skills, that companies such as my own and others are using the education platforms and the content and the huge skill base we have to help spread those skills around the economy. That'll be really important to maintaining the UK as a good place to invest in future. Well, I think we'll also see some concern from government around the composition of the economy. So, I mean, let me just give you a really small example. So in the US, people used to want to go to the cinema to watch a first run movie. So 53% in March of people preferred to go to the cinema than to watch that movie at home. That's completely switched in April. Now only 37% would like to go to the cinema. The remainder would prefer to watch it at home. Now, it's a really small shift. But actually, if that is writ large and you end up with no cinemas, what happens to the 10,000 people, say, who work in the cinema industry and so on and so forth, and all the knock-on impacts of that? Now, that composition is changing really quickly. Does government know where it's happening? Probably not. Is it equipped with live, real-time data on the economy? No. Companies like us are, and so I think there's a role for governments and tech companies to work together on what that economy looks like.
Right. So I think the role of tech tech is going to be much more profound in the post-COVID economy. So if I can use that term, Jim. So I think with that, I think we have some few questions. That's what Meghna tells me. So I'll hand over the mic to Meghna. So.
Thanks, Nikhil. Thank you very much, Alistair and Jim. We've got some questions here. So the first one is one of the state governments in India has put on hold several labour laws for the next 3 years to encourage innovation in industry. Would you say this is a policy more governments could follow, or we are treading on a slippery slope? I think starting with you, Nikhil.
So I'll tell you my opinion on this. So I think what the government has done is they've just put a large number of laws on hold. So that's not a good decision in my opinion, because there are several first principles that we have agreed on and moved on and created over many years, and for that matter for over a century. So many of those first principles are codified in the form of laws. So it needs to be a much more careful exercise, which requires a larger amount of planning and then implementation to ensure that it's handled in a sensitive manner in which the workers don't feel discouraged, the workers don't feel oppressed, and the workers feel sort of bought into the whole concept of reviving the economy. So the way to sort of go about this is, as most of you will know, India's labor laws are dreadful in the way it's numerous in nature. So we've got around 200 odd statutes, around 40 odd central legislations. Its implementation is absolutely chaotic. For a single matter, you will have to file close to 50-60 forms on a quarterly basis, some on a yearly basis, some on a half-yearly basis, and sometimes with absolute no logic at all. So it requires a serious revamp. It requires a serious relook, and COVID opportunity gives us that opportunity to sort of have that relook. But having the first principles cut off by way of an ordinance is definitely not the way forward. I think it requires much more thinking and planning through to ensure that the labor behind the organizations also feel bought in when we make such a decision.
Thanks. Jim, Alistair, did you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, Meghna, Alistair here. I mean, I have no expertise on India's labour laws, but what I would say is that, global companies like ours, you tend to apply a high standard across global workforces. So the extent to which a change to the labour law in a particular location would have a significant bearing on our decisions around investment, I would sort of gently question. So I think that would be my only comment.
Thanks, Jim. Did you want anything to say?
Nothing else to add given the time. It's fine.
Okay. The next question is, there are lots of tech companies out there. So how are we coordinating expertise from industrial tech, or how can industry be more proactive? I think, this is more for sort of TCS and RELX. So Jim, would you like to come on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's actually a bit of a knowledge gap in government. This isn't a criticism of government; it's a suggestion for how they want to adapt in future. I think government doesn't have a huge amount of up-to-date expertise in what is happening in technology businesses around the economy. They could do with a better dashboard to understand what's happening, where changes are happening, and so on. I think where offers of support have been made to government, I think they have just struggled to process all of those and to really engage with companies who are offering various different things in all areas, from PPE to testing to technology and so on. I think there is actually a role, particularly as so many people are now paid effectively directly by the government here in the UK and in other countries. There's a really important job for government to do to engage with businesses better, to engage with them more, understand what their issues are, communicate with them more, hear more from them, and I think that involves a bit of investment in a business coordination function right in the centre of government that they've lacked for quite a long time. That's the only way we can deliver the coordination that's necessary to get us through the crisis. What won't work is engagement as normal, that businesses should just crack on as normal and just get in contact with government if they need to. What will work, I think, is much stronger coordination and understanding of what's going on in each sector that's currently a little bit lacking.
Sure, thanks. Alistair?
I mean, I would endorse everything that Jim said there. I mean, I think that what Jim says there obviously applies to the UK, and you could argue it applies elsewhere as well. I think there does tend to be a bit of a knowledge deficit. There is a lack of systematic engagement sometimes with businesses on a consistent footing, and obviously government can be a little bit wary of engaging with a business and taking on services and finding in some way that it's been locked into some sort of arrangement because it didn't really understand the nature of the technology that it was acquiring. So that there are challenges on sort of both sides there. What I would say is that it's been helpful in India to see the role of the central think tank. You have government, NITI Aayog, taking a strategic view and building out expertise within its corridors so that it understands what is happening in the tech space. And that has been a very helpful nodal point that we've found for engagement. That sort of approach, if it could be spread further down through the system, into the sort of state level apparatus, I think would be helpful. But it is not easy for government to stay on top of the way that technology is evolving. So it just needs to invest in that thinking and intelligence capability a lot more.
Absolutely. Nikhil, did you have any thoughts on that?
So not really. So I think I pretty much agree with whatever Alistair and Jim said. I think the good thing that I've seen so far is that the government has been very receptive in taking the feedback, the right kind of feedback from the private sector. So I'm pretty happy with what I've been seeing in India so far. Nothing more to add on to that.
Brilliant, thanks. The next question is more on data. So, thank you very much for some very forward-thinking views on data. Sadly, we have seen cases where data in the private sector has been misused. What checks and balances could be agreed to prevent data misuse, which would have an adverse impact on the data owner? So,
I'm happy to chip in on this one. I mean, I think the GDPR is a strong piece of regulation. It's strongly enforced by the Information Commissioner's Office. My view is we don't need to increase the strength of that. What we do need to increase, though, is a number of businesses taking this more seriously and, crucially, taking action when issues are reported. That has been a failing of businesses in the tech sector, particularly the online platforms. And if we're to restore trust, that is critical that businesses take this extremely seriously in the way that we do here at TCS.
Great, thanks. Alistair, Nikhil, did you have any views?
I mean,
just to sort of
I was just going to say, when you look at GDPR, it is a very robust piece of regulation. The thing that one can take as a key learning from that are the scale of the fines that are levied on organisations that fail to adhere to the law. That is the best and most effective form of regulations, is the knowledge that if you step out of line, then you face very significant penalties. I don't think the law in itself needs any further strengthening. It's a question of implementation and letting it play out. I think that there's lots to be learned in terms of the principle-based approach that one sees within European regulation.
So just to sort of add on to that, so I think we unfortunately in India do not have the PDP bill yet. So I think we need that sooner than ever. So that's also very important to build in the trust, or sort of regain the trust that was there in the whole online space, so to speak, which means that businesses could also function with certain amount of certainty. Also, coming in from a COVID perspective, I think, look, if every transaction that I'm doing online is digital, whereas if I have to go and make another complaint or make a filing or have some sort of a complaint, I have to go to a court to do it. It sort of defeats the purpose. So I think even when we have the data protection bill, unless the dispute resolution process moves online, it's not going to help a large number of people. It's going to have, the state is going to have capacity issues. So it both needs to sort of happen together so that we get a very effective implementation of the law that's going to come into force.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I mean, we've got a few more questions, but considering the time, I think what we'll do is we will try and send out these questions to the panelists and get some answers out to people, if that's okay. I think, you know, if I can just thank all of our speakers, Nikhil, Jim, Alistair, it's been an absolute brilliant conversation. I think, you know, some of the things to take away, I think, is with challenges, there come opportunities for innovation. As Jim pointed out, the invention of radar, tin food, microwave. So I think, you know, here is another opportunity to sort of look at certain things like improving digital skill is absolutely paramount, upskilling, and then, you know, improving our digital infrastructure is absolutely key. This has also, I think, highlighted the importance of collaboration, the reliance of government on businesses and academia and vice versa, you know, working, that they're sort of complementary to each other. And what is required is to work together jointly and consultatively. And to be able to do that, I think, you know, the key to collaboration is, of course, regulation, legislation that builds trust. And some of the key points to take forward would be, you know, here is an opportunity on the Indian side to sort of look at or reassess the PDP bill, to review it in light with the current situation, you know, with no rush to sort of implement it or pass it through Parliament. Yes, of course, Nikhil, I know you want to see it, you know, done and dusted, but I think it's just to sort of look at it and sort of try and build all of the learnings into it. And similarly, I think with other legislations around the world, you know, governments should be looking at their data legislations, you know, looking at the learnings from this pandemic and incorporating it. And I think most importantly, what has come out is that once, well, you know, whether it's post-COVID or we live with COVID for the rest of our life, the new norm, I think we need to look back, or governments need to look back at the lessons learned, you know, the learnings from this and how we can build a society around the learnings. Was there anything else, sort of last words that, you know, you wanted to sort of add to that? I'll start with you, Alistair.
No, I think that's a good summary. Meghna, I just want to thank Trilegal and UKIBC for organising the event today. It's really appreciated.
Brilliant, thank you. Jim, did you want to add anything to that?
No, absolutely same here. Very well summarised. Thank you.
Thanks. Nikhil?
No, thank you very much, Meghna. Very well summarized.
Brilliant. So if I can take this opportunity once again to thank you, our speakers. Thank you very much for a great conversation. Thanks to all of our attendees for joining in. And just to let you know that this is one in a series of many webinars that we have hosted and we will be hosting. All of these will be available on our website. So please do visit our website to see. There might be others that you'll be interested in. And I think going forward, we are constantly looking at you know, issues that are impacting companies, that are impacting our members. So if there are issues that you want us to look at, please send us an email and we will be happy to look at that. Thank you once again for your time and have a lovely week. Thank you.